You are in the middle of a conversation and you can just feel the emotions exploding to the surface as if you were a small volcano. You just received an emotional message and now you are about to deliver one of your own. While nonverbal communication can sometimes be the most challenging to interpret, emotional messages can be very upsetting and the beginning point of trouble in interpersonal communication. Let's spend a few moments talking about the problem with emotional messages and how to achieve competence in dealing with emotional messages. The word problem is a pretty realistic word for this issue because most of us have a real problem with emotional messages. Emotional messages are at the center point of interpersonal communication, a term that we define as the verbal and nonverbal interaction between two or more interdependent people. When we're having an emotional conversation, it is usually filled with not only the verbal communication, but also plenty of nonverbal communication. These become communication events. Now, our everyday language refers to emotional messages in much more visceral ways. We are arguing, fighting, or loudly discussing. Whatever you might call it, it is a communication event. An event because it is impactful and can be a watershed moment in the relationship. These emotional messages, these arguments, these communication events, whatever you call them, are filled with emotions. They are filled with emotions like joy, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, or anticipation. Sometimes we are physically shocked by a loud voice. Sometimes we react to an emotional message psychologically because of experiences we've had that generate our own unique emotional response. And other times we experience the emotion because of how we were raised, our culture, our outlook on the world. When encoding the message, these same three types of influences also impact the person sending the emotional message. Emotional messages are a problem because it involves using our skill to interpret and send verbal and nonverbal messages. And now we just threw this entire conversation into a blender of emotions. Emotions encapsulate the message and emotions encapsulate our response. The question is, how can we win in the midst of this whirlwind of a communication event? We need to find ways to achieve competence with emotional messages. Emotional competence starts with realizing what is happening. We all have buttons, hot button issues, issues of conversations that we react to immediately just because of past conversation or experiences. We might have someone speak to us in a way we consider offensive, but the reason really has little to do with the person standing in front of us. The reason we are upset might not even be because of the conversation we are having at the moment. But the fact is, we all know when our button has just been pushed. To achieve a level of emotional competence, we must realize when this happens, we should step back. Knowledge should give us power. Knowledge and awareness of self and knowledge and awareness of information just like this. You should be different as a communicator because you have learned about this information. By stepping back, we can see outside of the conversation and ourselves. It's as if we can look down and see and begin to analyze, and then catch ourselves before the big red button of emotion is pressed. You are in the middle of a communication event, argument, fight, or whatever you call it. Emotions can be hard to interpret in others and hard to understand in ourselves. So, slow down. To achieve a level of emotional competence, we must realize when this happens, we should respond with care. When we receive an emotional message, we often go into the defense mode or protection mode. Before you do this, consider these strategies. First, be willing to own your feelings. Be able to, as you step back, describe to yourself what you are feeling, what emotion. There is power in being able to identify the emotion, as well as power in being able to identify the reason you feel this emotion. Many times our response is not related to that person standing in front of us, so be able to separate that. We might be having in our own minds an argument with a past experience or a person who hurt us in the past. Second, know when your emotions might have the best of you, and you need to ask the other person to resume the conversation later when you've had a chance to think about things. Third, make the emotions you send out as emotional messages responsible, appropriate, and consistent with the larger picture of your relationship with that person. Don't get caught up in the emotion of the moment and destroy that relationship. All right, here's your final exam question. Know the 8 emotions identified in our text on page 186. Have you ever found yourself exploding like a small volcano in the midst of an interpersonal communication event? Maybe the other person sent the first emotional message, or maybe you just responded emotionally. Either way, as a student of communication, you should strive to know the problems with emotional messages and how to achieve competence in dealing with emotional messages. See you in the next video.